So the inspiration for restoring the Range Rover was opportunity knocks, really. My friend of 25 years, Adrian Wynne, who runs an engineering business specifically restoring and maintaining Range Rovers, Land Rovers and Jeeps, he had it in his barn for, I think, getting on for 10 for 15 years. It just sat there. He brought 4 shells back from South Africa, one of which was mine. He sold the other 3 and kept the best one for himself. It was yellow, which I didn't like, a South African yellow, which is like a primrose yellow. So I thought, if I can get him to sell it to me, I'll do a colour change and spray it this my favourite colour of all time, which is Tuscan blue for a Range Rover. So the whole thing came together when I just chose my moment one day, made him an offer. He told me what he wanted for the car, and I shook his hand very quickly. I've known Adrian, we've rebuilt motorbikes together and looked after cars that I've had over the years. I have 2 or 3 Range Rovers that he's looked after. I think he really describes himself mostly as a vintage engineer, and most of the work that comes his way is vintage based. Our relationship and friendship has grown over 25 years, and I just spotted these Range Rover shells that he brought back from South Africa. Didn't really immediately think one of them had my name on it, but over time and seeing it sitting there, not progressing because Adrian didn't have any time to finish it for himself, it came into my head that I could buy it.
The engine on this car is a standard 3.5 litre V8. Makes a lovely noise, purring noise when it's going along. Stromberg carburetors, in line with the 1981 spec car. The ones that were built in 1981 and sent out to South Africa were sent out as kits. So some people say a lot of them are 1983 spec, even though it's a 1981 car. Gearbox is built for 300 brake horsepower, even though this car's only about 140, 150 horsepower. So the gearbox has got plenty of strength, plenty of torque, drives really nicely, really relaxed, just purrs along, makes a nice noise when you accelerate.
The restoration took longer than I was told it would. I was told 4, 5, 6 months. It actually took 18 months. But boy, did we do everything properly. So I helped stripping down the car, taking it apart. When all the panels came off, the ex-South African dust was like talcum powder and it just got into everything. So I did an awful lot of vacuuming, getting it out, getting it off. And I think the thing that turned out really well with Adrian's help is we managed to restore it as an original car. A lot of originality stayed with the car, like the carpets. We had the seats retrimmed, but they were retrimmed in the right materials. So it really does look like a very original car now. We started talking about a panel off respray, so taking off all the panels and respraying the car from its bare bones, really. I was very enthusiastic, and then I started buying books like this, and I read up on it, and I slowly got to know that they actually are quite difficult to restore, and the parts are difficult to get to maintain originality, but we pulled it off.
This is my purpose-made Range Rover gun cabinet, built by Car Furnishings in Birmingham, probably during the 70s and 80s. They're quite rare now. You can still find them if you look hard. But I was really pleased to get it during the restoration of the Range Rover, and we're all set to go clay pigeon shooting in the car.
The challenges we encountered were, I guess, the usual ones when you're restoring an early Range Rover. Mine's 1981, so I think they started coming out from the factory in 1969. But it's hard finding the parts, finding the original parts. In fact, Adrian himself had a lot of them. He spent 20 years buying parts and created a store. And I saw him get his best parts out of his workshop and put them on my car, which was quite satisfying. But I think probably the most challenging thing was getting the paint right and painting it a different colour so that you can't tell it's not an original colour.
Nice little unusual feature of this car is that it's a 4-speed manual with an overdrive, which is like a fifth gear. So I'm just going to put it into overdrive now. I'm only in second gear, but it just like gives you an extra gear, keeps the revs down a little bit, and just uses the torque of the engine to give you the power. And because this car's ex-South Africa, it's got air conditioning as standard, so factory fitted air conditioning. So no sunroof, so the air conditioning and the side windows being open can keep the car nice and cool. So two nice little unusual features.
There were some surprises we weren't expecting. When Adrian first brought the car back from South Africa, he started to restore it mechanically, putting a lot of new parts and new bits under the bonnet for the engine, things like the water pump. So those were all replaced in the first 5 years of his ownership, and then the car sat there for another 10 years. But what happened is a lot of those new parts deteriorated. And it's a dry barn, it's not heated, but it's a dry barn, a dry Cotswold barn. But boy, did we have to replace parts twice. I wasn't really involved in what parts to use. Adrian is just it's like he's eaten a book on Range Rovers, right? He just knows everything there is to know. And because he restores them all the time and he's always working on them, he's really up to date. He spends a long time buying parts and storing them away, knowing that they were becoming quite rare. So really that helped a lot. And indeed, some of the two-door Range Rovers that Land Rover restored themselves as continuation cars, Land Rover visited Adrian to buy some of the parts for that. That's how rare they are, and he has loads, so I was very lucky. It came together really quite nicely. The most memorable moment during the restoration really, I think, was probably hearing it run and move under its own steam for the first time. The other little kick I got was when the transfers went on the front bonnet and the back, and the Land Rover badge, the metal badge that goes on the boot, was put on. I thought, well, we're getting near the finishing touches now, and it does look great. And then I heard him start it up, he reversed it out the barn, and it was a bit of a thrill.
The car makes you feel really good driving it, actually. You're really nice and high up, you get a really good view of things. I've had a couple of Range Rovers in my life, and they're really nice cars to be in, a nice place to sit. You feel very secure. Any bad weather around, you always feel quite safe in one of these. Snow and ice and, lashing down with rain, place to be as a Range Rover.
I didn't have to worry about going over budget too much because what I agreed with Adrian when I shook his hand on the deal was we agreed a price that would be for a fully restored car to his standard. And I was lucky enough to oversee his standard. I was there a lot, doing little jobs, doing little things, nothing too skillful, but just generally being around. I saw how long it took to rub down the car for spraying, how long it took to get the panels off, more importantly, how long it took to get the panels back on and get all the gaps. The panel gaps are really hard on a Range Rover. There's a little joke that goes on, the one thing you can see from outer space on a Range Rover is the gaps between the panels. And mine hasn't suffered from that. The panel gaps are absolutely perfect, all down to the time that we spent on getting them right. I'm absolutely thrilled with the car. It's way beyond my expectations. It's glorious to drive. The way it sits on the road, the way it handles bumps and potholes is just fantastic. It makes a really nice V8 noise. V8s always sound well. It's got an original exhaust on it, so it sounds just right. So it just cruises beautifully. So I'm really chuffed with it. It will be my daily driver, probably not when the salt's down, but boy is it thirsty. I've not really measured it accurately, but it feels like 12 to 15 miles to the gallon if you drive it sensibly. If you push on a bit, it's less. Generally, I've had good reactions from the cars, but some people this day and age come up and say, wow, how many miles to the gallon do you get out of that? And I go, I don't really care. It's such a pleasure driving it, having fun with it, filling it up with fuel, 80 quid. It's a joy.
Superb ride in this car. It really evens out the bumps very well, and this is a bumpy road, but you just feel like you're floating along in one of these. The suspension is really good.
Well, I can say the car, now it's restored and I've probably done nearly 2,000 miles in it, is just a great feeling. It's exactly as I want it to be. Range Rovers of this ilk, they are a little bit vague on the steering, they do wander about a little bit on the road, but they just feel great. But the biggest thing is the reaction you get from everybody when they see it. They all start pointing and smiling and waving. And I've got other classic cars that probably are quite eye-catching. I've not had anything as eye-catching as this Range Rover. I don't know if it's the colour or people just like the shape, But the two-door Range Rover, I think it's really lovely, and from every angle it just looks right. We've got a few things left to do. Right now I'm just having the each individual gauge, including the instrument binnacle for the speedo and the fuel gauge, I'm having the bulbs changed so they're brighter. Not LED, a softer white light but more powerful, so the gauges at night just are a little bit easier to read. I found them very faint when the car was originally installed, so that's been changed now.
And last week my friends at 2010 fitted a nice early original tow bar unit at the back,
because that would allow us to tow a Brooklands Wolseley that I half own with my best mate, and there are going to be occasions when we're going to trailer that car to certain things rather than drive it. So there'll just be the odd occasion, probably going down to Goodwood when we want to trailer the car, and behind the Range Rover it will look fantastic. If anyone would like to check out the process of restoration and the joy we had from the 6.5 years that it took to do, check out on YouTube the restoration of a 1939 Brooklands Wolseley and grab a coffee and you'll have 25 minutes worth of fun watching that.
Worship every inch your feet have touched. Baby, run away with me. You kill it lonely. You make my eyes unsee. All the crazy. You make my heart believe. There's only one of you, baby. Run away with me. Don't leave me lonely. You make my eyes unsee. All the crazy. You make my heart believe.
In the near future, the car will be touring Scotland with myself and my wife and our dog. We've booked a little touring trip where we stay in hotels around the west coast of Scotland, all part of the same group. So we can turn up when we want, they're expecting us, we can park up safely and see Scotland, because I think the car is just made for Scotland. Some of those roads and some of those views, some of those hills you can go up, the car will be in its element. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And then coming up, we've got a couple of Goodwood events, a Goodwood members meeting in April, which my wife and I always attend, we never miss, and the Goodwood revival in September. It's all coming up, all to look forward to. I'll tell you the other thing about the car. It is going to be the car that I tick a bucket list thing, is I want to go and see the Northern Lights, and I want to take that car up to the Western Isles, high up the west coast of Scotland, right high up, where you can just park up on a fine night and see the Northern Lights. I've had great feedback on the car. Just, you know, going to Chipping Norton, parking it up outside a coffee shop, people come up, people start pointing, people start chatting. The whole thing about owning classic cars is the people you meet, the reaction you get, and how their dad used to have one, or their brother used to have one, or they remember this, they remember that. They see the car and they just go ballistic about it. You know, hit me with loads of questions, load of commentary, loads of chat, all complimentary. It's fun. I've taken it to a few shows actually, and the thing about Range Rovers, and the two-door Range Rover especially, it's almost always welcome at classic car shows or classic car events or even racing events. I remember going to Goodwood one year, the revival. There were half a dozen Frenchmen in one who'd come over from France for the Goodwood revival, all in a Tuscan blue Range Rover, and I stopped to chat to them and they loved it, and that was another part of me making my mind up, one day I'll have one. So the advice I'd give to someone who's thinking of restoring a Range Rover is try and start with the best one you can. The biggest thing is they do rust. There's lots of rust, lots of chassis rust and panel rust. Try and find one that doesn't suffer from that. So if you can bring one in from another country as a starting point, it will save you time, money and effort as you get into it, as well as the difficulty of finding the parts. That's the biggest thing you've got to worry about in restoring a Range Rover, is finding the parts if you want to keep it as original as you can, like I did.